Right then, so as you can see from the top there, my question, how can teachers develop effective strategies that help students learn independently? So sometimes it's not about the maths, but understanding how to learn, or how to develop an appropriate mindset. So I put down a couple of statistics from what I got from using Hegarty Maths, which we use to help students support students with the November resit, which took place towards the end of last year. As you can see, those that passed, on average, they did 3.8 hours during that period between September the 6th and November the 8th. Those that failed, on average, did about 1.9 hours. So you can see there's a big difference there, twice as much for those that passed compared to those that failed. And I'm going to be coming back to those as we go along. So why this topic? So we support students aged between 16 and 19 who had previously failed their grade 3 and only achieved a grade 3 maths. We don't deal with grade 1 and 2, they do functional skills, so we're only dealing with grade 3 GCSE maths. We do occasionally deal with other students, but that depends on initial assessment, usually ESOL. So we've got quite a low national pass rate for GCSE maths in FE, so we're looking at how we can develop strategies to improve that. So we found that many of the students seem to have an understanding of the basic maths straight away. So when you start a lesson, they quite quickly grasp what they need to do. But what I'm trying to do is move away from doing the basic maths in class and spending more time on the more complex problems. So I try and involve flipped learning with this approach. So as I say, independent learning strategies. So looking at the literature, I was looking at growth mindset and fixed mindset. And then, of course, with blended learning, looking at flipped learning. So we looked at some literature of the topic before I got started, before I started doing the research itself. So as part of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, we did some reading on it. And we found, growth mindset, people who had a good growth mindset generally did better. And the same with flipped learning, those that were able to access flipped learning generally did better. Now, with the growth mindset versus fixed mindset, it was just interesting listening to the previous presentation with Louise Brown and the growth zone model, because that was something I used as well. And it came from the resource motivation and engagement toolkit. And I used that and a card sort as part of understanding growth mindset with students in the classroom. So once I'd done the literature, I had a look at what we needed to do. I started with the research. So the interviews on independent study, this was done right at the beginning of the year. So back in September, October time. So I interviewed 6 students. I've got mixed responses about their understanding of independent study. And I generally try to choose students of mixed ability. So some high ability, some middling ability, some low ability. And it was interesting with some of the responses. So the 2 responses you can see there in quotes: we need to learn to make our own choices and how to achieve goals, and helps prepare you for further study. They're quite high level students. So we've got some quite high level responses, but it was interesting. Students that struggled to answer the questions. So it was a case of they needed extra input into helping them with the interview. As I say, we used Hegarty Maths. So I picked 36 students who didn't achieve a grade 4. And because it was all online, all on data analysis through Hegarty, I was able to use all 142 of the students that passed in November to have a look at their results. Now, as I said earlier, 142 students, they had on average, they did about 3.8 hours of work, independent study during that period. And of those 36 students that didn't pass with a grade 4 or more, it was half that amount. What I was able to do was to get exam scripts of the 36 students that didn't pass, and with some of them was able to show them what they did. I was able to put this information into an exam analyzer. So it's an AQA exam analyzer. So one thing I really like doing is doing the data analysis, but not just for my purpose, but being able to show it in the classroom as well. So it becomes part of my classroom presence, I guess, getting students to understand and respond to what's going on with their exams, with how they're using Hegarty or not using Hegarty. And then afterwards, we reflected and analysed. I used 6 students going through some of the questions from the November reset exam to see what they understood and where they went wrong. But I also introduced the growth mindset activity, so the growth zone model and the card sort. I've put this on purposefully because this is how I would show the students in the classroom. So I don't know if you've ever used Hegarty Maths before. It doesn't have to be Hegarty. It can be any online educational tool, MathsWatch, Go Maths, anything that has a data analyzer that you can use. And this year we've been using Hegarty. So I was able to put this on the screen. As you can see on the left-hand side, you've got the dates, but I've taken the names off. So all the students could see what they'd been doing during that period of time. And it's interesting to see how they responded to that information. And it was quite a positive response. So this information I showed after the exams. And it was interesting that they looked and they could see these results and were trying to work out what was going on here. And through questioning, they were able to see that if they'd have put in more effort, they might have done better. Now, most of these students were mine, and the ones that did the most on Hegarty, they passed. So 23 hours in the space of about 4 weeks, that's quite intense. Answered 1,000 questions in that period. And this is the conversation we were having with these students. So it's interesting to see how they responded to that as part of developing their own mindset. This is the exam analyzer I used. It's AQA. Now, I didn't get to show this to the students, but I was able to input the information from the exam scripts into this analyzer. I was able to see what was going on with our students. So it's interesting to see that, you know, typical of grade 3 students, green at the top, red at the bottom, but you get to see where they're going wrong as a cohort. So like geometry and measure, struggled with, algebra struggled with, and it's interesting the lack of ability with common questions, very low marks for common questions. So my idea of moving away from doing basic tasks in the classroom, because they generally get it quite quickly because they are grade 3, they obviously understand it to be at that level. It's trying to focus on common questions, so problem solving. So once I collected the data, I wanted to look at the results and see what was happening. So it's interesting with the initial interviews at the beginning of the year, got different levels of understanding and ability and levels of communication when discussing independent learning. Some students had a really good understanding of it and had no problem with it, and some students struggled with it. So I think when it came to flipped learning, I had to be very careful how I did flipped learning. Not everybody seemed to be able to access it with ease. So support was needed for those students that struggled to access it. Those next 2 points, those that passed and those that failed, I'd put them on earlier. So you, as part of the independent work using Hegarty Maths, as I say, 3.8 hours worth of work for those that passed, 1.9 hours worth of work for those that failed. And it's interesting seeing those 2 different statistics. It was also interesting analysing the data, looking at the difficulty students had with like geometry, algebra, and the common questions. And so these are areas I prefer to focus on. So by analysing the data, I think technology is great. If you know how to use it, there's a lot you can do with it. So students did show a clear understanding of what they needed to do to overcome a fixed mindset and develop a growth mindset. When I discussed it with them in the classroom using the card sort, talking about Hegarty Maths, getting it on the screen for them, they understood or had an understanding of what they needed to do, but they struggled with that question of, but how do you do it? And I found students responded really well to analysing their own performance in the classroom. As a starter for 10, 15 minutes, you could get up that data analysis I showed with Hegarty Maths. And it's interesting the kind of questions that come out about what they should be doing and what they do afterwards in terms of improving their own ability in terms of independent study. So some of the themes that came out of it. So, you know, I was using a lot of digital technology, and I've got to be aware that some students either don't like it or can't access it effectively for some of those reasons there. Some students, you know, for whatever reason, socioeconomic issues, can't afford it, don't have access to the internet at home. Some preferred not to use online educational, still preferred paper-based resources. And you have to be able to adapt your classroom sessions and your independent learning strategies around those ideas. Again, with pedagogical issues, differentiating between learners that can or showed an aptitude for independent learners and those that found it challenging. So this is where a teacher comes in and supports. Planning resources. So I found that sometimes I didn't need to use maths resources. I thought the growth and fixed mindset resources were great because it gives you the opportunity to have a conversation about what you should be doing. So it's not just for learning maths, it's for learning anything. Really good, employable, transferable points that you could have. I found the data analysis tools that I used was really good in the classroom. And again, with demographics, something you need to be aware of. So my last point, what now? So we've done all this, what does it mean? So, as you can see at the top, see how this sample of student fared with the June 2022 exam. So those 36 students who used will have sat the June exam. It would be interesting to see how they performed with their exam results when they come out in August. Because I've worked quite closely with the head of maths, I've already adapted the scheme of work and changed it accordingly to add these things into this. So looking to add growth mindset and independent learning strategies within lessons. Being able to incorporate the use of analytical tools with students, being able to join in the conversation about what they're doing as part of their classroom experience. And again, even teachers have their own comfort and growth models, growth zones. So it's important to be able to offer CPD because you might be finding that some teachers will be asked to operate outside their comfort zone. How do you teach something that's not maths if you're a maths teacher? So being able to opportunity for CPD at Leicester College and, well, anywhere else. And then because I did a master's degree last year, I put that last point in because there's 2 people on the Action Research team that are looking to do the master's degrees in education. And it follows a very, very similar process to how Action Research works. And it can be used to develop the teacher and provide extra stimulus to research into improving education practices. And I'll leave it there.